I know how Jesus feels about women. Nobody can ever talk me out of it. I have laid hands on and prayed for too many women who have been abused and shamed and assaulted. And I know how protective he feels over them. And I also know where that spirit comes from. So when I hear it coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, I don't have to wonder, is this somebody that I should be partnering with for political power? Because I know where that spirit comes from. It comes from Genesis 3. So, the very idea that these so-called leaders of the faith can't figure that out is just mind-boggling to me. It is actual violence to women. Mm-hmm. Words lead to assault and abuse. When you are calling women names, you are making it okay for abuse to follow because you're dehumanizing and degrading them. Mm-hmm. And so this is what Donald Trump is doing. And any Christian, that says that following Christ is important to them should be actually moving in the opposite spirit and rebuking Donald Trump.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy again to be joined by Amy Hawk today. Yeah, good to see you. And for those who listened to the live stream on Tuesday night, I was telling Ken Knapsack, who's the producer of our new live stream, that one of the things that's so important to me in order to make this work that we're doing here sustainable is that I need partners. And so Amy's one of the people I mentioned Tuesday night that if you've been around here a while, you've seen her quite a bit. And that's because I just want to bring in more voices, more conversation partners, more perspectives on things. And Amy's one of those people. And so I'm so glad that you're part of this, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me, Pat. I always enjoy our chats.
Yeah, me too. And today we're having a chat that's not maybe such a fun subject, but I think it's a really important one. We're going to be talking about the way that Donald Trump talks to women. And this past week, we had a couple other big examples of him being quite abusive to female reporters. And so we're going to play in a minute one of these clips. And but just for some context, Amy, you texted me today about what Trump said about executing Democrats for sedition. And I think that what we're seeing, and I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I feel like what we're seeing, it's part and parcel. The outbursts against these women this week are part of a general sense of, maybe anxiety or something. He's got lots of outbursts lately. I feel like more than normal.
Yes, this is a man who is not of sound mind. And so when he feels backed into a corner or he feels that he's not being supported, which is essentially what happened with the Epstein files and the Republicans, voting to release those. When he feels like he's losing a grip on things or the control and, his dominating instincts aren't working for him, he lashes out. And so this is exactly what he has done, not just to the reporter, but he lashed out to these his political opponents, these Democrats who put out this video to the military, which, by the way, I thought was an excellent video and very warranted.
So we're going to play a video here of him lashing out. And Amy, you can comment after this.
Mr. President, what did Jeffrey Epstein mean in his emails when he said you knew about the girls?
I know nothing about that. They would have announced that a long time ago. It's really what did he mean when he spent all the time with Bill Clinton, with the president of Harvard, that is Summers, Larry Summers, whatever his name is, and all of the other people that he spent time with. Jeffrey Epstein and I had a very bad relationship for many years. But he also saw Skype because I was president. So he dictated a couple of memos to himself to be bring. You got to find out what did he know with respect to Bill Clinton, with respect to the head of Harvard, with respect to all of those people that he knew, including J.P. Morgan Chase.
Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Incriminating in the file, sir.
Quiet.
Okay, this is the kind of thing that makes my stomach clench up and I just become outraged. And first of all, of course, this is a pattern for him. I document in my book probably at least 15 or 20 names that over the years he has called women who either rebuke or criticize him or, talk back in some way. So he has called women dog, face of a dog, horse face, pig, Miss Piggy, crazed lunatic, nasty, blood coming out of her, low IQ, bimbo, bleeding. He has this thing about women and blood. It's really strange. So yes, this is a pattern for him because he only wants to be surrounded by, women that are going to tell him how wonderful he is. And this is abusive. So this is an abusive behavior. He's even kind of leaning in, like pointing his finger at her. It makes you kind of wonder, how does he behave to family members? How does he behave when cameras and reporters aren't around? If he feels like he can treat a woman like that and call her a name in that moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because the body language was, to me, more disturbing than the words. The words are disturbing, but you're right. When he pointed at her and leaned in like that, I thought, wow, how do people put up with this? And I've heard a couple of main responses. I've heard two things that quite a bit about this. One of them is people who say, I can't believe that the male reporters in that room didn't stand up for her, didn't call him out. And then I've heard people say, I can't believe that the women who work for him haven't stood up and called him out. And it's just the strangest thing why people don't respond. And I think part of it's probably fear. Part of it is wanting to keep their jobs. But I think if we live in a world where a reporter could lose their job for saying, Mr. President, with all due respect, that was way out of line. If you lose your job for saying that, we've got bigger problems.
Well, they should definitely be responding. I do want to say that I think also there's a shock factor there. Like, I was trying to put myself, if I had been on the plane in that moment and he said that to her, I would like to think I would have stood up and rebuked him. In my mind, that's what I do. But I think
you do it online, and I do it online. We do rebuke him every day, but
I rebuke him every day in my head.
It is different, though. It is different, isn't it, when you're standing there?
It's different, but also in the moment, I think you are so shocked. To hear a president, to see him lean in like that, it's kind of paralyzing for a minute. And so sometimes I think, are people just kind of paralyzed? Like they're just looking around like, what just happened? And then the moment passes, and then, you probably do get more nervous about saying something. But I would like to think that I would step in that moment and rebuke him. But certainly Christians should be speaking out, and particularly if, you are a Christian who has supported this president. And the reason I say that is because our main goal as Christians is that we are supposed to be radiating Christ, reaching out to the lost, showing kindness, showing love. And if we are supporting an abusive bully who calls women names, and we don't counter that by saying, you know what, I don't support this, the world has no reason to trust us ever. They shouldn't. They absolutely should not, because anybody who is going to prop up a bully is not trustworthy. So the other part about that is that if we want to be truly Christ-like, and I wore my t-shirt today with this verse on it, but it says, leave her alone. It's John 12:7. Got to get away from my microphone for a second. And I have an entire chapter in my book called Leave Her Alone, where I recount the story of the lady that goes to the party. Mary goes to the party and she wants to show love and affection to Jesus. And so she anoints him with oil. And the Pharisee doesn't like that. And he's a bully. And he tells her, to sit down. He starts rebuking her. And Jesus tells him, leave her alone.
Mm.
And I think that in that moment, if men could really clue into how Jesus feels about women and protecting them and defending them, I think they would have a stronger stand in moments like this. And so when men don't speak up on behalf of women who are being bullied by domineering men, they are literally just showing us that they don't have Christ-likeness.
I've talked with Christian men who are Trump supporters and about these sorts of things. And oftentimes I hear them say things like, well, he's abusive to everyone. He's not just abusive to women. And I don't think that's the defense. I don't think that's the powerful defense you think it is, first of all. But also, I think he has been especially abusive to women. He has a certain thing about women, and you just documented some of it. But I think that his abuse of women goes so deep in the MAGA movement that I used to think it was a bug. And now I'm wondering if it's a feature, a feature of that movement. And just a couple of days ago, there was this article that ProPublica put out about the sex trafficker, the accused sex trafficker, Andrew Tate and his brother, who they're basically a couple of the most vile abusers of women in the world, and they brag about it online, and they've built this whole following online about their abuse of women, and they're wanted, I think, in 3 different countries. They're facing indictments for sex trafficking, and the Trump administration apparently helped them to get out of one of those countries and to come back here a while back to the U.S. And so this ProPublica article, by the way, what I've heard, I don't know if it's true, what I've heard is that Barron Trump is a fan. Wow. I'm not sure that that's true, but it checks out. It would all make sense then. But anyway, the ProPublica article that came out a couple of days ago about that event, about them, flying into Florida from this other country, the headline tells the whole story from 2 days ago. It says the White House intervened on behalf of accused sex trafficker Andrew Tate during a federal investigation. And it goes on, federal authorities were chided for seizing electronic devices from Tate and his brother and told to return them. Records and interviews show. Experts said the intervention was highly inappropriate. And so this is a huge story. It should be a huge story. And I think most of my listeners probably won't have even heard of it, but it should be a huge story. And it's a disgusting story. And in today's MAGA movement, I'm just seeing this picture painted that abusing women just clearly is not a disqualifier to be a member in good standing of the MAGA movement. And I find that disgusting. But here's the thing. I've talked with people who are like, well, yeah, there's that part of the MAGA movement that's like this worldly thing, and so sure, those people are fine with abusing women, but then there's the Christians who are part of the MAGA movement for all these other reasons, pro-life or whatever they say. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I don't think so. I think that this is built in to what I'm learning, built in a lot more deeply into the conservative Christian movements in America, this misogyny, than I knew. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think you're right. And this betrayal by the Christian community is what caused me to really want to step out of the evangelical church. When I started realizing that people that I had looked up to in the faith, so I called him my internet pastor. I had a spiritual, father that I listened to all of his um, all of his material, all of his sermons every week. And I just really looked up to him. I looked up to Franklin Graham, back then. So many pastors and leaders that I considered fathers of the faith, and then it was like Trump is going on, or he is on video bragging about sexual assault. He is calling women names. Even at that time, Miss Piggy, dog, all of this stuff. And they weren't defending the women. And it started like cluing me in, like they idolize him. They care more about having an alliance with him than they do about protecting and defending women. And that's not Jesus. That is not
Right.
the Jesus that I know. So I think that there is some misogyny that is so baked in to some of these church communities that when it erupts, they don't recognize it as evil. It's such a familiar spirit, such a familiar attitude that they don't see it for the evil that it truly is. And so they're not taking a Christ-like stand. They're still idolizing the man who is perpetuating abuse and harm against women. And to me, that is not Christ-like. It's actually anti-Christ.
Right. Yeah. And you had talked to me about, you called that earlier, a Genesis 3 spirit of misogyny. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, because all the way back in Genesis 3 is where we find out that there is enmity between the serpent and the woman. And so the serpent is always going to go after the woman with words, with assault, with shame. I became aware of this, I led a healing ministry for women in my church, off and on for 20 years. I was regularly praying for women, laying hands on them, praying for Jesus to heal their broken heart, their broken spirit because of abuse that they had suffered. My husband and I had a ministry where he would go and pick up women from the local women's shelter and bring them to church. And then I would pray over them. And I had a group of ladies. So I know how Jesus feels about women. Nobody can ever talk me out of it. I have laid hands on and prayed for too many women who have been abused and shamed and assaulted. And I know how protective he feels over them. And I also know where that spirit comes from. So when I hear it coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, I don't have to wonder, is this somebody that I should be partnering with for political power? Because I know where that spirit comes from. It comes from Genesis 3. So, the very idea that these so-called leaders of the faith can't figure that out is just mind-boggling to me. It is actual violence to women. Words lead to assault and abuse. When you are calling women names, you are making it okay for abuse to follow because you're dehumanizing and degrading them. And so this is what Donald Trump is doing. And any Christian, that says that following Christ is important to them should be actually moving in the opposite spirit and rebuking Donald Trump.
Yeah. Amen. And, I think about this, and there's something that's very true about our culture that a lot of people will say, because I talk to people about this stuff, and people will say things like, well, it's everywhere in the culture. It's not just in the church. And it's like, again, I don't think that's the defense you think it is, because I think we're supposed to be better. But I was listening to, some people won't like this, but a couple podcasts that I really enjoy are the Skep Chick podcast. It's an atheist woman who I learn a lot from, and she helps me to see how the world sees Christians, you know. And another one in a very similar vein is the Friendly Atheist. I listened to him. And both of them have been talking about the Epstein files, specifically because this skeptic, she shows up in the Epstein files, in the Epstein emails that were released, because she was calling this physicist, Lawrence Krauss, to task, you know, and he's this, you know, very highly respected physicist. And she was calling him to task years ago for his relationship with Epstein. And then her email he ends up copying it to Jeffrey Epstein and saying, how should I respond to this? You know? And so she's in the Epstein emails. But my point being, this is everywhere on one hand. Misogyny and abuse of women is part of our culture on one hand. And so it happens in their circles, it happens and what the mistake that people will make is to point it out in the other camp. They'll say well, look at what they're doing, you know, they're no better. And it's like, I have two things to say to that. First of all, they might be better. They might actually be better. There might be less of it there than there is in the church. And I have a reason for saying that. But secondly, we're supposed to be better. Like, Jesus doesn't call us to conform to the world. No. He calls us to be a people set apart, a people that show what the kingdom of God is like, you know. And so all the things that you said about how Jesus treated women, we're supposed to be displaying that, not saying, well, we're no worse than them. But I think the whole cultural thing about power and control and misogyny and all of that is just as evident in the church. And the part that I think you and I have both seen that makes it even worse is this authoritarian thing in a lot of conservative churches where it's like the leader can't do any wrong. And then biblical reasons why women should never be leaders, and the leader can't do anything wrong. So what do you do if you're a woman and you're in that kind of situation? I'm saying this is what we need to come against. We need to talk about it. We need to call Christians to something better. That's why I wanted to talk to you today about this.
Well, we need to call Christians to something better because women and children were safe with Jesus. And the church, if the church were doing its job, church would be the safest place for women and children. But it's not. I mean, I hear from women all the time across every platform. I left the church. You know, I had to leave the church either because women, when the church is partnering with a bully and an abuser of women, how are they going to feel safe if you are promoting this guy? They shouldn't feel safe in a church like that. And there are, you know, so many wonderful churches, but there are also so many churches who have been exposed as hideouts for sexual predators and bullies of women. So this is a huge issue in the church that we need to get right. And we need to understand the love and affection and protectiveness that Jesus feels towards every woman. And that should be the attitude of the church. There should be no bullying, no dehumanizing language, definitely no assault. But just the fact that this is tolerated tells you that Jesus' Holy Spirit is not being valued in the church. They would rather have Donald Trump. They'd rather have what they could get for political power than actually follow the true spirit of Jesus and do what he says to do.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, I'll just kind of close with this, that in this case, in the way that women are treated, it's the same as so many other things with Donald Trump, where as you and I have both warned for years, when you elevate somebody to a point of prestige, president of the United States, it doesn't get much more prestigious than that. And when you elevate somebody to that point, then you're elevating so many things about that person. And so now what maybe was hidden in the shadows in a lot of places, in a lot of churches, about the treatment of women becomes acceptable. Well, even the president does it. And when it's and we see that in so many different ways, as he's basically defining deviancy down, to use that phrase, and this is a case where it is. And I just think, yeah, let's just call Christians to something better here. Absolutely. And it starts by calling it out. It starts by saying this is not acceptable. And instead of saying, well, he's my boy, so I'm gonna let him, just let him cook. No, it's not acceptable. And even for people who voted for him, it's time to get on social media. If you've been on social media, for instance, defending him, now's time to get on social media to the same extent and call him out, because you're one of the people who put him there. If you're, it's just Christians have to do this. Otherwise our conscience is gone.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I feel has happened, is that our consciousness have just been so seared. And the Bible warns about that. We've been taken over with, cold love, because Trump is a bully, and he has contaminated the spirits of those who have partnered with him. And this is the result, that he can call women names, treat women poorly. And I don't know, have you seen Franklin Graham say anything about it?
I have not.
So where's the rebuke?
Right. Yep. And I think that Trump, by the way, is failing. I think it's safe to say now, like, my attitude towards him I've thought all along that his project would not succeed of taking over America in the way that he wants to. He's doing a lot of damage, obviously hurting a lot of people, but he's failing, and he's 3 years plus, just a little more, and he's going to be gone. He's going to be out of power. And all these Christian leaders who lined up are going to, for the rest of their lives, have all of these statements that they made supporting this guy. And historians are going to have no problem showing all of the things that he said and did. And Franklin Graham and the rest, Robert Jeffress, the rest, are going to have a record of 10, 12 years of just absolute support for the vilest character to ever hold office as president. And that's something that's going to take a long time for Christians to unwind, and to dig out of the hole that they're digging for themselves now. So
yeah, I think there's a word for that in Revelation to one of the churches too. It's called shameful coward.
Shameful coward.
Yeah.
Let's just end with that. And maybe Franklin Graham and Robert Jeffress will somebody send this to them. And so thanks, Amy. Thanks for talking about this. There's so much more we could say, but thank you for this. And
on that note, don't be a shameful coward. All right. Thanks,
exactly.
Pat.
And yeah, thanks everybody for listening.